I told you not to mess with me.
It hurts. Please stop.
Hey, what are you doing? You are nothing but a pathetic, stupid old man.
Get off him now.
Are you crazy?
She beat her elderly father in law until his teeth fell out. Then her husband returned. She didn't know the key turned in the lock. She didn't know her husband was home. And she definitely didn't know he would walk in right at the moment her fist connected again, hard enough to make the old man's mouth snap open in pain.
Not just any old man.
His father. The man who raised him when nobody else did. The man whose hands built the very roof she now lived under. The elderly father-in-law lay on the floor of their living room, weak, trembling, trying to shield his face with shaking arms. But she wasn't done. She struck him again, and something white bounced across the tiles.
A tooth.
Then another. And another. For a second, the whole room froze. Like even the air was shocked by what it had witnessed. But she didn't stop. Because in her mind, this old man was just a burden. A reminder of the family she never wanted. A powerless obstacle she could punish in private. What she didn't realize was that the man standing in the doorway wasn't the husband she could manipulate. He wasn't the calm man who understood her stress. He wasn't the quiet man who avoided conflict. He was a son who just watched his father get destroyed. And now he has one choice to make. Protect the woman he married, or end her reign forever. Because from this moment on, someone is going to pay for what happened in this room. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ocean of Tales. Kindly watch, comment, and subscribe on this channel. We will be grateful if you help us do this. We will be notifying you when we drop a new video. Don't forget to tell us where you are watching from. The key slid into the lock with a soft, ordinary click, the kind of sound that never announces disaster. Daniel Carter pushed the door inward, already loosening his tie, already rehearsing the tired smile he'd wear when he greeted his family. The air inside the house felt wrong immediately, thick, sharp, metallic. Before his eyes adjusted to the dim living room, his ears caught it. A dull thud, then a strangled gasp, then another thud that carried weight and intention. Daniel froze mid-step, his hand still on the door handle, as instinct whispered that whatever waited ahead could never be unseen. The living room unfolded in fragments, like a nightmare assembling itself too slowly. A figure on the floor. Old bones folded at the wrong angles. Shaking arms raised in weak defense. And above him, Vanessa.
His wife.
Her arm rose and fell with frightening rhythm, her face twisted into something Daniel had never met before. Each strike landed with the sound of flesh meeting tile, echoing off the walls Papa Elijah himself had helped build decades ago. Daniel's breath left his body in a single, silent rush as reality crashed in. Papa Elijah tried to crawl backward, palms scraping helplessly against the polished floor. His breath came in wet bursts, his eyes wide with disbelief more than pain, as if he couldn't understand how dignity had abandoned him so completely. His lips trembled, blood darkening the lines of his mouth, while his body curled inward, instinctively small, instinctively human. Daniel's heart pounded so loudly it drowned out his thoughts, yet his feet refused to move. Vanessa stepped forward again, her movements sharp and precise, fueled by something colder than anger. The room felt suspended, like time itself had taken a step back to watch. Then it happened. Her fist connected once more, and something white skipped across the tiles, light and unreal.
A tooth.
Then another clink. Then silence, so loud it screamed. Daniel felt the world tilt. His vision narrowed, heat roaring in his ears as his mind rejected what his eyes had already accepted. This wasn't shouting. This wasn't stress. This was violence already deep in motion. This was cruelty with momentum. And the woman delivering it wasn't a stranger. Vanessa didn't stop. She stood over the broken old man like he was unfinished business, like his suffering owed her interest. In her eyes, Papa Elijah wasn't a father. He wasn't family. He was weight.
Waste.
Something to erase quietly while nobody was watching. Except someone was. Daniel stepped fully into the room at last, the door closing behind him with a sound that felt final. Vanessa turned too late. Their eyes met across the wreckage of the living room, and in that instant, she knew. The calm husband was gone. The accommodating man was gone. What stood there now was a son who had just watched his father get destroyed, and whose silence had finally snapped. Morning light used to find Papa Elijah first, creeping through the curtains before anyone else stirred, settling gently on hands that once carried weight and purpose. He had built habits around dawn, slow steps, quiet prayers, memories stacked neatly like tools he no longer used. Age softened his body but sharpened his awareness, and he felt the shift long before bruises appeared. Voices lowered when he entered rooms. Conversations paused. Chairs were moved just a little farther away, as if space itself had begun to reject him. Time rewound to when his presence commanded respect without effort. Neighbors sought his counsel. Children quieted when he spoke. His laughter filled the compound he helped raise brick by brick, sweat by sweat. Those hands, now trembling, had once lifted beams, paid school fees, buried his own grief, without complaint. But respect ages badly when power changes hands, and slowly, his worth was reduced to inconvenience measured in medication, silence, and space. The house changed before the blows ever came. Meals arrived late. Doors closed too quickly. He learned which corners to avoid, which hours were safest. He learned to make himself smaller, quieter, grateful for crumbs of peace. Each day, dignity slipped a little further from his grasp, replaced by a careful patience that masked fear. And no one noticed. Because neglect wears a friendly face. Vanessa's footsteps carried authority in that home, sharp and decisive. Papa Elijah felt them before he heard them, felt the mood shift like pressure in the air. Her words were polite in public, clipped in private, and cruel when nobody else was near. She didn't shout at first. She corrected. She scolded. She reminded him, daily, that he was no longer useful. The living room became his cage. The walls that once echoed with celebration now absorbed suffering quietly. He tried to speak once, then twice, then never again, because each attempt was met with cold dismissal. Silence, he learned, hurt less than resistance. And silence is easy to ignore. Daniel didn't see this erosion. He worked. He trusted. He believed peace meant absence of noise. And Papa Elijah, loving his son more than his own safety, carried the burden quietly, never imagining the cost would come this violently. By the time the floor met his body, the abuse had already been rehearsed 100 times in smaller ways. What Daniel witnessed wasn't sudden madness. It was the final act of a cruelty that had learned how to hide, until it no longer needed to. Sunday mornings painted Vanessa as a woman people admired without question. She walked into church with calm grace, head slightly bowed, voice soft when she greeted elders, laughter measured and polite. She knew when to smile and when to sigh, when to speak about patience, sacrifice, and the challenges of modern marriage. Women nodded at her words. Men praised her composure. To the outside world, she was the picture of a devoted wife carrying burdens quietly and honorably. Afternoons told a different story. Once the gates closed and witnesses disappeared, her tone hardened like drying cement. Her smiles vanished the moment she stepped inside, replaced by a sharp impatience that cut through the house. The same hands that lifted him books now slammed doors. The same lips that spoke gently in public spat commands at home. And Papa Elijah learned quickly which version of her lived behind closed doors. Control was her language. She controlled when he ate, where he sat, how loudly he spoke. She corrected him in ways that felt intentional, small humiliations disguised as discipline. If he forgot something, she called him useless. If he spoke too much, she reminded him he was old. If he stayed quiet, she accused him of plotting. No choice led to peace, and that was the point. Fear thrives best when it pretends to be order. She rehearsed cruelty the way actors rehearse lines. Slowly, carefully, escalating only when she was sure no one would interrupt. Bruises stayed hidden. Fear stayed private. And when neighbors visited, she became gentle again, offering drinks, checking on Papa Elijah loudly, touching his shoulder just enough for appearances. Anyone watching would think he was loved. Papa Elijah saw the pattern clearly, but lacked the strength to break it. Age had stolen his speed, not his understanding. He knew she wore two faces, and he knew which one was real. The public mask existed to protect the private monster, and it worked, because society often believes what it wants to see. Daniel believed it too. He saw harmony, not terror. He saw patience, not manipulation. Vanessa's deception didn't just fool the community. It lulled the one man whose absence made the abuse possible. And as long as that illusion held, the violence felt justified in her mind. What Daniel didn't know was that cruelty grows bolder when it goes unchallenged. Masks crack eventually. And when they do, the damage underneath is never small. The impact sounded wrong before it looked wrong, a sharp, hollow crack that cut through the room and snapped reality in half. Papa Elijah's head jerked sideways, his body too slow to follow, and for a fraction of a second, everything paused. Even Vanessa froze, fists suspended in the air, breath caught somewhere between rage and shock. The living room held its breath, walls silent witnesses to a line just crossed. Something white skidded across the tiles, spinning once, then twice, before stopping near the leg of the coffee table. It didn't make a loud sound when it landed.
It didn't need to.
The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. A tooth. Not a metaphor. Not an exaggeration. A real tooth, broken free from an elderly mouth that had already lost so much. Papa Elijah's hand moved slowly toward his lips, fingers trembling as they came away stained with red. His eyes widened, not in pain alone, but in disbelief, as if his body was only now registering what his spirit had already accepted. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't anger. This was something else, something final. His breath came in short, shallow pulls, each one rattling like it might be the last. Vanessa stared at the floor, at the tooth, at the undeniable proof of her own cruelty. For a heartbeat, doubt flickered across her face. Not remorse, fear. Fear that something irreversible had just happened. Fear that excuses no longer existed. Because bruises could be hidden. Silence could be manipulated. But a tooth on the floor was evidence that spoke louder than any witness. Daniel saw it too. The image burned itself into his mind instantly, branding him with a truth he could never escape. That single object transformed shock into clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding he could smooth over. This wasn't stress or anger or marital conflict. This was violence. Deliberate. Repeated. Unforgivable. The room felt smaller suddenly, closing in around them, trapping everyone inside the moment. Papa Elijah whimpered softly, a sound stripped of dignity and strength, and Daniel felt something in his chest tear open completely. That tooth wasn't just bone, it was the last piece of denial falling away. And as Daniel's gaze lifted slowly from the floor to the woman he married, one terrifying realization settled in. Whatever came next would destroy the life they pretended to have. Daniel's body reacted before his mind could catch up, muscles locking tight, as if the floor beneath him had shifted without warning. The room felt unfamiliar now, like a place he had never truly known, and the man lying on the tiles looked smaller than any memory he carried. His father, once tall, unshakable, was reduced to shallow breaths and trembling hands. Daniel's ears rang, not from noise, but from the sudden absence of it. And in that silence, something inside him cracked wide open. Memory rushed in without mercy. Hands that lifted him onto shoulders. A voice that taught him how to stand straight, how to keep promises, how to survive when life refused to be kind. He remembered scraped knees, late-night talks, the quiet sacrifices that never asked for repayment. Those memories collided violently with the present, and the contrast made his chest burn. This wasn't just pain he was seeing. It was betrayal layered over years of trust. His eyes moved slowly, deliberately, toward Vanessa, and the woman standing there felt like a stranger, wearing a familiar face. The calm explanations he once accepted dissolved instantly. Every excuse he had ever defended for her turned to dust. In their place rose a cold, sharp understanding. Silence had protected the wrong person. Avoiding conflict had fed something cruel. And his absence had been permission. Daniel didn't shout. He didn't rush forward. His silence deepened instead, heavier and more dangerous than anger. The kind of silence that marks a decision forming. His jaw tightened, breath measured, as he stood between the man who gave him life and the woman who took advantage of his trust. For the first time, love and loyalty stood on opposite sides of the room. Papa Elijah tried to speak, lips trembling, but no sound came. That was when Daniel understood fully. This wasn't about saving a marriage anymore. It was about ending a cycle, about choosing who he would be after this moment passed. And as Daniel took one slow step forward, the question that would define everything pressed hard against his conscience. How do you protect the innocent without destroying the life you built to escape conflict? Whispers had always followed Vanessa long before fists ever did, drifting through the compound like smoke people chose not to notice. Neighbors sensed tension in the way Papa Elijah moved. Too careful, too quiet, eyes always scanning for permission before sitting or speaking. Elder women exchanged looks when they saw him alone on the veranda for hours, hunger hiding behind politeness. These were not coincidences. They were signs. And signs in African homes are never random. Counsel came softly at first. An auntie pulled Vanessa aside once, her voice low and respectful, reminding her that age deserves patience, that elders are not obstacles but altars of blessing. Vanessa smiled, nodded, and laughed it off later, calling it outdated thinking meant for women without ambition. Another neighbor warned Daniel casually that his father seemed too afraid in his own house. Daniel brushed it aside, trusting the peace he believed existed. Vanessa mocked the concern afterward, labeling it gossip, jealousy, interference. Cultural boundaries were crossed quietly. Traditions meant to protect the weak were dismissed as superstition. Respect was treated as optional. Vanessa believed modern life gave her immunity from old consequences. She saw Papa Elijah not as a root, but as a weight slowing her rise. Every warning felt like an insult to her authority, and she crushed them with arrogance instead of reflection. Even Papa Elijah tried once, just once, to speak. His voice was gentle, apologetic, asking for peace rather than protection. Vanessa laughed then too, reminding him that the house was no longer his, that times had changed. That laughter echoed louder than the blows that came later, because it marked the moment mercy was rejected. Warnings are not curses. They are doors left open. Vanessa closed every one with pride, never realizing that when advice is ignored repeatedly, consequences stop knocking politely. They arrive unannounced. And now, standing in the wreckage of her own defiance, the silence around her felt familiar. But this time, it wasn't protecting her anymore. Dust hung in the afternoon light as Daniel's eyes drifted around the living room, landing on corners he had stopped seeing years ago. The cracked skirting near the wall. The ceiling beam slightly uneven. The tiles Papa Elijah insisted on laying himself because craftsmanship lasts longer than pride. Every inch of that house carried fingerprints of sacrifice, but comfort had blurred memory. Standing there now, Daniel felt the weight of a truth he had ignored. This home was not inherited through luck. It was earned through pain. Long before Vanessa ever crossed the threshold, Papa Elijah had given his body to that land. Sunrise found him lifting blocks. Nightfall met him nursing calloused palms and aching joints. He worked through sickness, through disappointment, through seasons when dreams were postponed, so his son could move forward. The walls didn't just rise. They endured. Each room held hours of unpaid labor, broken sleep, and silent prayers whispered over unfinished floors. Vanessa never saw that history. To her, the house was a reward she stepped into fully formed, a space she believed she deserved without question. She arranged furniture, issued orders, claimed authority. never once asking how much blood and time had soaked into the foundation beneath her heels. What she called ownership was actually borrowed grace, mistaken for entitlement. Papa Elijah remembered every sacrifice. He remembered sleeping outside during construction to guard materials. He remembered choosing cement over comfort, delay over rest. And yet, he asked for nothing in return, not obedience, not reverence, only peace. That peace was the one thing he was denied. Daniel felt shame tighten his throat as understanding sharpened. His father wasn't living in his house. He was surviving in a monument built from his own suffering. And the woman who treated him as a burden had benefited most from a legacy she despised. As Daniel's gaze settled on Vanessa again, one realization hardened inside him. You cannot abuse the hands that built your shelter and expect the roof to keep protecting you. Paper whispered softly as Daniel's trembling fingers pulled open the slim brown envelope Papa Elijah had guarded for years without spectacle. It wasn't hidden behind locks or buried under secrecy. It had rested in a simple folder, tucked among old documents no one ever bothered to read, because everyone assumed they already knew the ending. The room leaned in as pages slid free, crisp and official, carrying weight that didn't need shouting. The letterhead sat boldly at the top, stamped, dated, undeniable.
Names.
Addresses. Signatures. Clauses written with the calm certainty of a man who understood time better than people around him. Papa Elijah had prepared quietly, not out of spite, but wisdom. He knew bodies weaken. He knew power shifts. And he knew entitlement grows loud when silence is mistaken for surrender. This wasn't revenge.
It was foresight.
Vanessa's eyes followed the movement of those papers with growing unease, her confidence cracking in small, visible ways. The house she ruled suddenly felt unfamiliar, like a stage where the script had changed without warning. Ownership wasn't implied anymore. It was spelled out. The land. The house. The authority. None of it belonged where she assumed it did. Everything she treated as permanent rested on permission that could now be withdrawn. Papa Elijah's breathing steadied slightly, as if the truth itself carried relief. He had never intended to weaponize his legacy, only protect it. The will revealed a quiet rearrangement of power, one that didn't scream or threaten, but stood firm and immovable. Daniel read slowly, each line landing heavier than the last, understanding dawning in stages. Vanessa took a step back without realizing it. Her voice didn't rise. Her anger didn't explode. Fear crept in instead, cold and precise. Because cruelty survives on assumption, and assumptions collapse when truth appears in ink. This wasn't just a document. It was a mirror, reflecting greed, ingratitude, and the cost of believing power is permanent. And as Daniel folded the papers back into place, one fact settled uncomfortably over the room. Everything Vanessa thought she controlled had always belonged to someone else. Silence entered the room first, thick and deliberate, settling over the furniture like dust that refused to be brushed away. Vanessa stood still, but something in her posture had shifted. Shoulders no longer squared with confidence, chin no longer lifted in command. Power didn't leave her loudly. It drained out in pieces, the way air slips out of a cracked tire, unnoticed at first, then undeniable when movement becomes difficult. The house felt different now, no longer bending around her presence. Her eyes moved instinctively, scanning the walls, the floor, the doorway, searching for familiarity, for reassurance. But the space no longer responded the way it used to. The authority she exercised daily suddenly felt imaginary, like a title spoken too many times without proof. The same rooms where she issued commands now echoed back her uncertainty. The living room that once obeyed her mood now exposed her fragility. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He didn't need to. His silence carried weight now, anchored by truth and backed by action. He moved with purpose, positioning himself between his father and the woman he once trusted. That simple shift in alignment spoke louder than any confrontation. Vanessa noticed it immediately. The loyalty had changed sides, and with it, the balance of power. Papa Elijah remained seated, weak but present, watching the collapse quietly. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. Justice, when it arrives properly, doesn't celebrate. It corrects. His existence alone, still standing after everything, undermined the fear she once wielded. The man she tried to erase had become the axis everything turned around. Vanessa attempted composure, smoothing imaginary creases in her clothes, adjusting her stance as if control could be reclaimed through posture. But authority doesn't respond to performance when its foundation is gone. The respect she demanded had been replaced by scrutiny. The fear she enforced had dissolved into exposure. Karma didn't shout. It didn't strike. It stayed. Quiet.
Permanent.
And as Vanessa realized she was no longer the center of that house, one truth settled heavily inside her. Control lost this way never returns. Movement broke the stillness as Daniel finally stepped forward, his shoes brushing against the tiled floor with a sound that felt louder than it should have been. The air tightened around him, every eye, spoken or unspoken, pulling toward the weight of his next decision. This wasn't a dramatic crossroads with music swelling in the background. It was quiet, heavy, the kind of moment that doesn't ask for bravery but demands responsibility. His body stood between two lives that had defined him, and neither could be protected without sacrificing the other. His gaze dropped briefly to the floor, where fragments of teeth still rested like broken evidence, then lifted toward his father's battered face. The sight cut deeper than anger ever could. This was the man who taught him how to stand, how to endure, how to build something from nothing. The man who carried pain without complaint and age without bitterness. Protecting him felt instinctive, automatic, like breathing. Yet another force pulled just as hard. Daniel's eyes shifted toward Vanessa, and memory flooded and uninvited. Wedding photos. Promises whispered in quiet rooms. The belief that love could soften sharp edges. He remembered defending her, excusing her moods, absorbing her cruelty as stress, as misunderstanding, as something patience could fix. Marriage had trained him to compromise, but no one teaches you how to compromise with violence. No vow prepares you for this kind of reckoning. His chest tightened as the reality sharpened. Silence would make him complicit. Protection of marriage would become betrayal of blood. And intervention would not just end an argument. It would end an identity. A husband choosing his father over his wife wasn't just making a moral stand. He was detonating the life he knew. Daniel inhaled slowly, the sound shaky but controlled, as resolve settled where doubt had been. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about right and wrong, about the line that once crossed could never be uncrossed. As he straightened his shoulders and prepared to act, the question burned in the air. What would this choice cost him, and would anything be left when the dust finally settled? The room felt smaller as reality finally closed in, the walls seeming to inch closer, while the truth pressed down from above. Vanessa's confidence didn't vanish all at once. It cracked slowly, like glass under pressure, each fracture exposing fear she had never allowed herself to feel. Her shoulders sagged, her breath shortened, and the power she once carried dissolved into panic as she realized the balance had shifted forever. This wasn't a misunderstanding she could explain away. This wasn't a private moment she could bury. What had happened here had crossed a line that time could not erase. Her eyes darted between Daniel and the old man on the floor, searching desperately for the version of her husband who once softened to her tears. Her body moved before her pride allowed it, hands trembling as regret finally found a voice. The woman who once ruled through fear now reached for mercy, her strength replaced by pleading desperation. But remorse that arrives only after exposure carries a hollow sound, and the room felt it. The silence did not welcome her apology. It rejected it. The old man's breathing was shallow, uneven, each rise of his chest a reminder that some damage lingers long after the blows stop. Pain had carved itself into his body and dignity, leaving marks no apology could heal. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would take time cruelty had stolen. The cost of what was done could not be paid with words alone. Daniel stood motionless, his face hardened by clarity rather than rage. He understood something painful in that moment. Love does not erase consequences. Marriage does not excuse violence. And regret does not rewind harm. Protecting the vulnerable now meant refusing to soften the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it became. As the weight of accountability settled over the room, one reality stood unshakable: some acts change relationships forever. And as Vanessa's tears fell unanswered to the floor, the question lingered heavily in the air: when cruelty reshapes a life, who decides what redemption should cost? The house fell into a silence, so deep it felt ceremonial, like the closing moment of a trial where no one dares to speak until judgment has settled into their bones. The air was heavy with everything that had happened: violence, betrayal, regret, and everything that could never be undone. Outside, Lagos continued its rhythm. Distant horns, a barking dog, a generator humming somewhere far away. Life moved on, indifferent. But inside that house, something permanent had been carved into every wall, every memory, every future decision that would follow. Daniel stood at the center of it all, no longer just a husband or a son, but a witness who could never unsee what he had seen. He understood now that neutrality had a cost, and silence was never free. Protecting his father had demanded courage, but living with that choice would demand even more. Justice didn't feel victorious. It felt heavy, necessary, and lonely. The kind of loneliness that comes when you do the right thing and still lose something precious. The old man rested quietly, battered but alive, his survival a fragile victory that carried its own grief. He had outlived violence, but not its memory. Some wounds would fade. Others would remain as lessons written into flesh and soul. Survival, he knew, was not the same as healing, but it was a beginning. Vanessa sat alone now, stripped of control, reputation, and certainty. Power had made her careless. Cruelty had made her visible. And visibility had summoned consequence. Whatever future waited for her would be shaped not by excuses, but by accountability. The house she once ruled no longer belonged to her story. And then the story turned outward, toward you. What would you have done if love demanded silence, but morality demanded action? If family loyalty asked you to look away, while conscience asked you to stand up? If power tempted you to abuse it, knowing no one was watching? Because stories like this don't live only on screens. They live in choices. They live in homes. They live in moments when no one is watching. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done? And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Ocean of Tales. Let us know where you're watching from, because these stories belong to all of us. If you were the one that was humiliated in this video, and God being so kind later saved you from the hands of your enemies, what will be your reaction towards your oppressors? Comment and subscribe on this channel. Let us know your mind.